Oh, here he is. Okay, hi Neil.
Hi.
Okay, so let me introduce ourselves. My name is Pat, and this is Monica. We are from PayLane. We have great pleasure to meet you all on our next expert webinar, No More Chargebacks. And our expert for today is Neil Smith from Verifi. He's the greatest expert on chargeback prevention and chargeback objection. He has great expertise in these fields, so you will be able to hear directly from the source how to defend chargebacks, how to deal with them, how to prevent them, because that's something we are also interested in. And at the end of Neil's presentation, you will also have a chance to ask some questions. So let me ensure that we are all well heard and seen. Can you type something in the chat box so that I know that you can hear us actually, I mean participants? Ah, okay. Good, all right. During the presentation, Monica and I will hide into the chat box, so give us some space there. We will sit with you together and listen to what Neil has to say. Oh, and one last thing, the whole event is being recorded, and later on it will be available on our website. So in case you missed something, don't worry, you will have a chance to go back to it. But remember, if you want to ask Neil a question, you will only have a chance today. Okay, Neil, the floor is yours. Please share with us your knowledge.
Great, thank you, Pat. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will go through and look at chargebacks and how we can get rid of chargebacks for the majority of it. So chargebacks can effectively be managed and obviously how we make sense of your business. In the session, I'll try to break down some definitions, ways we can prevent chargebacks up front, and to get rid of the white noise. You'll hear me talk about white noise. I'll explain what I mean by that as we go through. We'll look at true fraud, friendly fraud or first-party fraud, or buyer's remorse, depending on which word you want to use. Some up-and-coming changes. We don't know the details around some of these yet. It's speculative, but we can talk on it. And some solutions to manage your chargebacks and obviously manage those chargebacks before they reach the chargebacks. So what is a chargeback? Well, I'm sure everyone on the call must know this, but it's effectively when the cardholder receives their statement or makes a purchase and chooses to ring either their bank, their issuing bank, or their merchant to say they don't recognise, don't want, haven't seen, haven't made the purchase, and that results in a chargeback in our payment system, which has a detrimental effect to the ecosystem. The majority of cardholders globally, and it's around somewhere between 80 to 86%, don't contact the merchant. They actually ring the issuing bank, and that's not what is supposed to happen. They're supposed to call the merchant to try and resolve their dispute up front. So the cardholder rings into the issuing bank, and the only kind of weapon that the issuing bank has in their armory to date is to fire off that chargeback. As we move through the presentation, you'll quickly learn and understand that there are ways to manage this and also ways to resolve those disputes right up front without having to get involved in the chargeback cycle, chargeback process. So there are a number of types of chargebacks, and we'll go through these on this slide. Criminal fraud, I mean, clearly that's genuine, what they call genuine fraud or true fraud. That is where the customer or the cardholder has a real concern that this transaction wasn't made by themselves. It's quite a common type of chargeback, and it's an unauthorised transaction that takes place. Surprisingly enough, not the most common, and we'll get on some of those as we get to the reason codes. The next one in line is a credit not processed. It's a common type of chargeback. Happens really when the customer returns the goods to the merchant and requests a refund, and then subsequently reports that credit was not posted to their account. Now, of course, there are times when that generally happens, the credit hasn't been posted to their account, and there are times when that is not always the case. The next one in line is item not received. This obviously, of course, when you purchase your goods, typically online through like a major retailer, for example, online like Amazon. You made your purchase and it hasn't actually turned up to your house, whether that's got delivered somewhere else or has been left and somebody's taking it, that's not been received by the consumer. That's a typical type of chargeback, again, clogging up the system. The one that's not so common is technical problems. This is when you're halfway through your purchase and there's a technical issue which relates to the payment process. And that doesn't mean the goods have not been received, it just means there's been an issue where maybe there's been a duplication of the transaction onto your account, or something technical has taken place during that process to result in what will become an ongoing chargeback. Now, with all of the chargeback process in today's world, it takes around 6 to 8 weeks to resolve one single chargeback, which is hugely costly, a massive burden on the industry, both from a customer's point of view, from the stress it causes for that long process, from the bank's perspective in terms of lighting, resource, time taken, documentation to be filed, and even more so from the merchant's perspective, where you have limited resource but the same amount of time and length it takes to either challenge or put in documentation to challenge that chargeback. A big problem in the industry today. And then the final one is cancelled reoccurring transactions. These are probably one of the largest offenders in the chargeback world today, and that's not necessarily the fault of the merchant that is a reoccurring biller. It could potentially be the onus on the cardholder, where they, how do we politically put this correctly, they're trying it on, for want of a better word. So they subscribe to a magazine that gives you a very low transaction value in initial outset, or free for the first 30 days. In the small print, or even up front in the adverts, it talks about first 30 days are free, the subsequent months are then billable. It's at that point where it reoccurs, where the consumer / cardholder decides actually they don't want to have this reoccurring bill and they want to get rid of it. The problem with this, of course, is when you bring your bank or your merchant to cancel that reoccurring billing, by the time that chargeback is in process, before that's resolved and that account has been cancelled, the next statement's been issued and the subsequent next transaction has then occurred. So you're in this perpetual cycle of reoccurring transactions that keep coming through. So not only are you clogging up the system, huge cost and burden to the industry, but of course the cardholder is getting more and more angrier as each month passes. So we have common reason codes. On this slide, I'm going to digress a little because I would like to talk about the Visa's new service that's coming out towards the end of this year, October 2017, I believe. I can only speculate on what's going to happen with this at this stage because we don't have the details around it necessarily, but it will be a change in the industry, and it will be a change in how chargebacks are looked at. But on this slide specifically, we've got 4 different types of common reason codes. You have the Visa's 83, as the cardholder did not authorise the transaction for whatever reason. First transactions come in, the consumer or the cardholder is adamant they didn't authorise that transaction, and whether they did or they didn't, under the current rules and regulations as it sits, the cardholder has the right to say it wasn't me, and at that point, still at this stage, the bank really only has one option to file that chargeback, and so the cycle begins. Reason 53, that's goods, services not described or defective. Not as common, but you could potentially have a situation where you had multiple products ordered, 2 out of the 3 products you ordered in that particular bill is accurate, the other one isn't, so you want to be able to charge that back, so not as described. Next one along is Visa's 75, and that's cardholder does not recognise the transaction. Again, this is quite common, so 75 and 83 are the most common, and that does sit in the world of, I guess, reoccurring friendly fraud, and that's that white noise I was talking about. And as we get on towards the end of the slides, I'll explain about how you can use preventative measures to really get to tackle that white noise, where in reality, if you can get to grips with the white noise of the friendly fraud reoccurring billing, that should leave in the system what we call true fraud. And then finally, Visa's reason code 30, that service is not provided or merchandise not received. Again, it could be querying you've ordered one thing and something else has turned up. You've gone in for a service that you thought you were going to get. In fact, something different turns out. So not as described on the tin, shall we say. These are not all the reason codes, and it's probably a good segue at this point to talk about VCR. So at the moment, there's probably something in the region of 40 reason codes. We just look at Visa specifically. Can everyone hear me again? For some reason I got muted there. Perfect, I shall continue. So at the moment, we just look at Visa, one of the schemes specifically. They're the guys that are leading the charge for a change in the chargeback process. They have something coming out called VCR. That'll be active in and around October timeframe in Europe and UK. This is a big change in what we know and how chargebacks work. So they're going from, for example, and it is speculative, so we don't know the final details around this, but from what we understand, this is what's taking place. So from around 40 reason codes, that's getting reduced to down to 4, and so the 4 key types. So, for example, 83. There's a number of different codes behind that, or reasons behind that chargeback. It's getting reduced. So you have true fraud, friendly fraud, or code didn't authorize, or code does not recognise a transaction. So from 40 down to 4. The process of VCR really takes away the control, I guess, from, for want of a better word, from the merchant and from the issuer. So what's happening today, there's the chargeback is filed, so the cycle runs, and you'll see from one of my slides coming up the process that takes today. And there's a back and forth between the issuing bank and the merchant, obviously by the acquirer, and you can have representments and then re-representments, and then you can go to arbitration. All of that process, really, for the most part, it looks like it's going away, and Visa, through rules-based engine and some technology, is looking to condense what was a 6 to 8 week process down to a week by making those decisions, automated decisions, based on the right information being available to decide who would win that chargeback right. So it will require a lot more work from the issuer to make sure the documentation, the information, the fields are all populated correctly, and it will require more work on the merchant side to make sure their documentation is in place and correct when the chargeback has been submitted, to make sure that can be challenged. If all of that is in place, Visa will make the decision on behalf of the issuer and the merchant to see who won that case. Whereas today, that's back and forth between those two parties, with arbitration being the final word. That takes away the control. They're thinking it's going to tidy up and clean up the chargeback process. We'll have to wait and see. There are still ways, which you'll see shortly, where we can prevent even getting to that stage. So you can use solutions to resolve disputes before even having to file that chargeback and letting Visa make that decision. It's a change of a way of life in chargebacks. Hopefully it will have a positive impact when you do get to a chargeback, but there are still better ways to make sure that white noise, friendly fraud, reoccurring billing can be removed from the system upfront before you have to file that chargeback. So true fraud, that's deliberate stealing of goods or services from the merchant through the use of unauthorised payment methods. I think we're all fairly clear on what a true fraud is, and that really should be left in the system, and that should be worked through the system and resolved in the system. Allow the investigations teams and the local authorities to do the right thing to track those fraudsters, to stop them perpetrating fraud into the system, causing cost and burden in the industry today. We do know that last year, and then again this year, it's looking like the card not present fraud, specifically talking about the UK here, is rising 18% year on year. We know that in the industry, in the UK banks and some of the big banks, that fraud can exceed in the region of £14 million a year just in a particular bank. So that's quite a lot of money. If you look at statistics going through 2017, 2018 up to 2020, the rise is going to be phenomenal in fraud. What we don't know, and what we're trying to look at and how we can resolve, is how much of that could be avoided through the use of correct solutions and systems, both what I consider after the horse has bolted, which is chargebacks, and also before the horse has bolted, which is pre-chargebacks to resolve disputes. If we can get rid of a lot of the stuff that we don't deem to be fraud, and that's educating cardholders. So instead of a cardholder seeing a particular URL on their statement that they might not recognize, if there's ways and means of making that URL more comprehensive, so i.e. what's behind that URL, what does that merchant actually sell, what do they do, what are the goods and services that have on offer, to trigger a thought process in the cardholder's mind to ensure that they don't actually pick up the phone to say, I don't recognize this. And to educate cardholders that actually it's not okay to try it on or to commit buyer's remorse. You know, don't go and buy that product in the first place if all you're trying to do is buy the product, keep it and not pay for it. That's also not an appropriate use of either time, funds, or people's technology and banks' technology. And so it's important that we try to resolve this up front. Friendly fraud, which I've talked about, is that buyer's remorse. You know, I think if we go back to last year, there's a lot of documentation that was published on the internet on how do you make the most of your transaction and how do you get that transaction charged back so you don't have to pay for it. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. It's quite blunt. You know, there is educational material out there to educate cardholders to ensure that they can ring their bank to say they didn't pay for the goods. There are ways in which we can educate cardholders to say actually it is your purchase. The other big problem, of course, we have today is our children. They game online. There's in-game purchases, in-app purchases. They ask for mummy and daddy's card details to make those purchases, and which is fine, other than the fact that these games, you're continuously purchasing, you know, power-ups, whatever it might be, as you're going through that game process, continuously billing against that card. When the statement comes in, mother or father looks at that statement and goes, I don't recognise what those transactions are. And then if we have enough information up front, we can actually educate the cardholder that actually it's probably one of your family members, and it then allows that decision to be made on how those goods will be paid for. What it does do is it stops issuing a chargeback into the system. So let's start by improving the process. Preventing chargebacks is essential to stopping unnecessary revenue loss and merchant account problems. Two big issues. I mean, revenue loss on both sides of the business, and for merchants, it's a huge burden on what should be a very exciting day-to-day process of cardholders buying their goods and services. So we need to be proactive. We need to analyse the current chargeback scenarios. We need to implement additional fraud controls. So I believe there's a lot of activity going on in the market from both the merchant side of the business and the banking side to upgrade, enhance, look at solutions to prevent us getting to that chargeback stage. Recognise the implications of different transaction types on those chargebacks and improve customer service. Making sure we've got the right information at the right time, submitted through the right channels to get rid of unnecessary weight in the system, which is causing a lot of revenue loss and a lot of headache. And customer service, which I've talked on the previous slide, is how do we educate our cardholders out there, or our customers if you're on the merchant side, to really understand, i.e. what they're purchasing, and really understand what it is that they've received on their statement to ensure that this whole chargeback is never comes to fore, so we never see that chargeback in the first place. So solving the chargeback problem, it's like the million-dollar question. I believe we have solutions, and as Verifi, we do have solutions for that as well. We want to be able to deflect that dispute before they escalate. So really, you deflect the dispute, you stop the chargeback before they impact your business, and then you want to recover that revenue. So deflection is to stop the cardholder picking up the phone in the first place. If they do pick up the phone, how do we stop that transaction from heading off for a chargeback, resolve that dispute outside the chargeback process, where all parties are happy, where we haven't got into that either 1 or 6 or 8 week chargeback cycle where there's hidden costs and additional costs and fees and penalties. And then it's kind of the last port of call. If you do have to go down the chargeback process and we've missed those 2 opportunities, how do we recover the revenue? You know, so there's a way that we can do that by ensuring that if the horse has bolted, let's maximise our documentation and process to get the right answers and to recover that revenue. So on the left-hand side, you'll see there's, and this is generic, so it can differ from bank to bank and certainly from merchant to merchant, but overall, generically, globally, this is kind of how dispute works. So you have dispute inquiry, or the customer's inquiry coming into the bank. It should have been the merchant, but they're ringing the bank. The issuer processes that dispute credit to the consumer immediately. The associations, so Visa, MasterCard, etc., process that dispute. The acquiring bank receives that dispute. The merchant then finally receives that dispute. It's too late to stop action, stop delivery, avoid the chargeback by then. The merchant then has to process the representment, gather the documentation, resubmit them to the system. The issuer processes the merchant representment, and so the cycle continues. Even at that point, there could be a re-representment, and we can end up in arbitration. So that whole process there could be, and even with the revised workings coming out, there's still going to be about a week. But before that, in today's world, that could be a 4 to 6 week process, even 8 weeks in some cases. If you use combined solution that Verifi offers, and there's two there, one's called Order Insight and the other's called CDRN, and that's our cardholder dispute resolution network. We sit very much before that chargeback process. So if you look on the right hand side there, consumer rings in to make that inquiry, to dispute that transaction. Right up front there, you can use something called Order Insight, which is using our merchant partners' data to pass to the issuing bank to allow the issuing bank to educate their consumer in that transaction. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if they've got a statement and on their statement there's a URL message, let's use something simple, and there's many merchants out there. If I use iTunes, for example, it will just say iTunes. You don't know what's behind that. Behind that, of course, is a whole wealth of product information. Right here, Order Insight can allow the issuing bank to look at that product information and go, Mr. Cardholder, or Mrs. Cardholder, we believe that actually the purchase in iTunes was 3 purchases. It was 2 albums, and actually there was a DVD or an online movie purchased in there. And this was the product information. We can actually see that there was a thumbprint used. This was the device that it might have been, maybe an iPad. This was the IP address, and this was a time and date transaction. Just that information alone would be enough to trigger the cardholder to go, oh, actually, I know what that was. You're right. We're purchasing something for Christmas, and I didn't realise that was what that particular value was. So right up front, we've deflected that. Take that one step further, Order Insight could be deployed into .com or mobile banking for the issuing bank. So if taken that feed and that relevant product information into the .com or mobile app situation, that would allow the consumer or the cardholder themselves to click on that transaction to bring up that relevant information I was just talking about, which would allow that cardholder to go, yes, I know what that transaction is. That stops the inbound call either to the issuing bank or to the merchant. It's completely avoided the chargeback process. Right there is white noise. This is where we can stop unnecessary chargebacks entering the system. And it sits before the chargeback process. If, however, that's still not enough, you can use the cardholder dispute resolution network to pause the chargeback process, allow the issuer to communicate directly to the merchant real time, say, look, there could be a chargeback potential here. Can you have a look at this transaction? The merchant goes, do you know what, I'd rather refund that $3.99 transaction than go through the heartache of the chargeback process, which could cost me 5, 6, 7, 10 times more than $3.99. They'll refund that transaction immediately to the consumer's account, notify the issuing bank goes, brilliant, we've resolved this case, we don't have to go to a chargeback. So right there on the right hand side of the screen where you see Order Insight and CDRN process, you'll see that we've cut out nearly 85 to 90% of that entire process by resolving a dispute up front before it goes to a chargeback. And just to give context behind that diagram, the 3-layer solution for merchants and issuers is deflect the dispute, stop the chargeback, or if you do have to go to a chargeback, recover those chargeback losses. So Order Insight would identify and reduce fraud, friendly fraud and chargebacks, receive real-time visibility to the consumer outcome to prevent double dipping by unscrupulous customers. What I mean by double dipping is receiving the goods and getting a refund. Improve cardholder experience and preserve the loyalty and sales revenue. So you want to preserve the customer service from the banking side and the loyalty to the bank, but equally as importantly, as a merchant, you want to have that loyalty of the customer. You don't want them going off to a competitor. Remove cardholder confusion, confirm the purchase decision, and proactive representment. If you miss order insight, you can, and they're not, you don't have to use both. You can use one or the other, but combined, they're a valuable solution. Cardholder dispute resolution network enables real-time collaboration between the issuing bank and the merchant to resolve that dispute before it reaches a chargeback. It stops that dispute happening in its tracks. It prompts a resolution for fraud and non-fraud customers, and it has incredible data accuracy. So between the two products, you have incredible wealth of data that can be used to deflect and resolve that dispute right up front. And then there's chargeback representment service, which allows our team of people to assist merchants to build the case to represent that chargeback with a high propensity of having that resolved in the favour of the merchant. So if you have entered into that chargeback realm, then there is a good way to protect yourself. And I believe that was the end of the presentation. Hopefully we have some questions.
Okay, Neil. Okay, yes, good. So there was a question. If you can, of course, thank you for the presentation. There was a question. If you can elaborate more about the reason 75 and 83, because I think it was rather unclear for our for the participants how to distinguish between those two and how to deal with them simply.
Sure. Let me go back up on the presentation. We'll bring that slide up. Can do that in a second. So between 83 and 75. So we'll take 83 first. Obviously, the definition is the cardholder did not authorise the transaction. What that means is that actually they never allowed their card details or account details to be used to make that purchase. Whereas 75, they don't recognise the transaction. So they're not saying that the card was never used at that store before, potentially. What they're saying is they don't actually recognise that particular purchase at that store. So for example, if we use Amazon, I may use Amazon 10 times in a month with my particular card number. But of the 10 times, there's one transaction there that I didn't actually recognise. And it could be a number of different reasons. It could be genuine. So it could be that Amazon has multiple descriptors. So Amazon is the merchant or the merchant ID. Then under Amazon, they may have 10 different descriptors that you may see that come through on your statement. Good example, you have Amazon, you have Amazon Prime, you have Amazon Marketplace. So I may have made 9 purchases using Amazon Prime, and we might one transaction there on Amazon Marketplace, and I've never heard of Amazon Marketplace. That's the difference. So I didn't recognise that transaction, but I have authorised that card to be used.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, does it perform equally for buyers in the USA or buyers worldwide? Is there any difference between these?
No, so I'll take this in 2 parts. If we look at the Verifi solutions, our solution has a passport to travel around the world. There's no difference. It can be utilised from merchants to issuers globally with no issues and no restraints. If you're talking about the chargeback process, I can't talk to all schemes. I know Visa better than MasterCard particularly, and there's no difference in the way that the chargeback process works. There may be nuances in country to country, but I'm happy to get a clearer picture on that offline if required. I'm happy to receive that question separately.
Thank you. And for example, when it comes to the fraudulently related chargebacks, is there any sense defending them? Because I know that very often it happens that even in case someone sends the objection file, it is not objected. So is there any sense doing so?
To defend the fraud transaction?
Yes, for example.
Okay, so yeah, I'd say there is, because if you've seen from the statistics, not everything is true fraud. Unfortunately, the word fraud is used as one big paintbrush across the entire industry. A very simple example, if a consumer rings into a particular bank, whether it be in the UK or maybe in the US, depending on their internal process, as soon as I mention the word, I don't recognise this, or I think this is fraudulent, either of those two sentences, which could mean completely different things, all still gets funneled into one bucket. And by using systems, methodology and process before firing off a chargeback, we can work out through investigations what actually is true fraud and what should be fought, whether that's a merchant fighting and trying to build documentation to fight the case against an issuer because a cardholder is trying something on, or whether that's resolving that dispute amicably between the two organisations up front outside the chargeback process. I think the word fraud is used too loosely in the industry. You know, the word friendly fraud, I'm not particularly keen on that. I think buyer's remorse is better, and first party fraud's a big problem because, yeah, what do you do if your 9-year-old son has been taking your card out your wallet and used it for online gaming? You know, the bank's going to go to you, would you like to report this? And what do you say to that? Yes, I want to prosecute my 9-year-old. I don't. There's so many nuances and issues in the system at the minute. I think we're a long way off from saying let's not bother fighting.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And there's also a question: what about downgrading caused disputes?
I'll just read that myself. Sorry, 2 seconds. Okay, so you're talking about the ECI indicator and where that's been downgraded, and so you're now exposed against the other auth attempt. Again, I think that's a challenge in the industry. I don't know, and unfortunately, I don't know what the right answer is there. What I do know is that actually, if you have that up front and you use certain solutions and systems, you can maybe avoid the chargeback on the second auth before it reaches the chargeback. A downgrade is a problem because the second attempt you are liable.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think that we've run out of questions for now. But thank you, Neil, for your presentation and for answering all the questions. And of course, thank you for participation from the chat. Of course, if you have more questions, you can always send an email to Neil or to support@paylane.com. So we will gladly answer all your questions. And oh, okay, there is another question.
I know. So what I have a few questions. I'm more than happy to talk offline. If you want to send an email, we can talk about this. If you have lots of questions, of course. So let me just have a quick look at it because I know you've got a couple there. So bear with me a second.
Well, there is how and when merchant will be notified after Visa alert.
So sorry, a bit of feedback here. So we're talking about the after the horse has bolted. So during the chargeback process, how and when the merchant will be notified after the Visa alert. Or are we talking about before the chargeback? Anyhow, you're getting feedback on my voice. Sorry. I'm happy to take it offline if you want to have a discussion around that.
Okay, so I think that if there are no more questions, just feel free to send an email to Neil or to support@paylane.com, and we will answer all your questions as much as we can, and so on. So Neil, thank you very much for your time and for your presentation, for being with us, and everybody who is here with us, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you have any feedback concerning this this webinar, or you have maybe some ideas for the next webinars, also feel free to contact us. Thank you very much. It was so nice having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.